Like most founders, he wasn't looking at any of that.
He had a vision.
He had a vision of what this was going to be. And so when he walked in the front door and saw the foyer of this old Victorian home, he saw in his mind's eye what it would be, not what it was, which I think is a founder's gift.
Welcome to the Founder Story Podcast, where we learn from entrepreneurs about their journey from their first inspiration to their first employee, and even the steps they took to become the powerhouses they are today. Welcome back to another episode, everyone. I am your host, Rick Porter, and today we have a guest on, and that's going to talk to us about a local charity organization that's near and dear to Cinch IT's heart, and we've been involved with for years today, and that is Why Me and Sherry's House. We're joined today by David Hagan, who's going to tell us all about the founder story, about how it was created, what it does, how he came into that organization. I've heard the story, and I've read the story. It's a fantastic story. It's something different, right? We're not talking about the traditional entrepreneurs that come on this show. So I'm very excited to hear it. And then we have a little bit of a surprise, which we've never done before on the podcast before, but I think it's going to work out really well. So real quick, Why Me is a Worcester-based nonprofit organization created to help central New England families cope with childhood cancer. Why Me is not affiliated with any national organizations. And David, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me today.
I'm very excited to hear this one. So, as always, we dive right into the founder's story. So can you take a little bit of time to tell us about how Why Me first came to be?
Sure. So the founder is actually Terry Shepard and his daughter, Sherry Shepard, for who the house is named after. Sherry was the first pediatric oncology patient at UMass when they started doing kids. And Sherry was diagnosed with leukemia, and when she was on the floor and, meeting other kids and seeing what her parents were going through, she was sort of appalled that there was no support for the families. People were getting their medical needs addressed, but the emotional component was not there. So she had her father bringing in teddy bears, and she would go around to different kids' rooms and give them a bear or, just lighten their spirits. And, her comment to her dad really was, somebody needs to fix this. Somebody needs to support these families. And that was sort of her idea right from the start. So he explained to her what an acronym was. Okay, so if we're gonna start something, we got to give it a name. Take the first letter of each word that describes what you do, and that's what an acronym is. And he went to work, and when he came home, she said, "I got it. It'll be called Why Me," which is Worcester Helping Youth, Memories Everlasting.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. How old was she?
She was 12.
12 years old to come up with such a dynamic acronym like that.
Well, and the thing is, at 12, that she understood her own experience, and she had the empathy to understand what the people around her were going through. Other kids, the disruption to families, her parents. I mean, that's pretty heady stuff for a 12-year-old. So, not just thinking about her own life that had been thrown into turmoil, but, what's the impact on families? What do they need? And so right from the start, it was about, hey, let's get people together outside the hospital setting, have some fun, make some memories. And that was really the birth of the idea of Why Me.
I love it.
So how this evolved over time, and I'll sort of go through this quickly, is Margaret White, who was our first director of family services for the first 27 years, she was going through this as a family with her son, Jason. Terry was going through this as a parent with Sherry. And they became friends, as a lot of us have through the years. They became friends in the hospital. They essentially lost their kids together. So in the beginning, Margaret was running around, tons of volunteers. She was the kind of person who went out for a quart of milk and made 2 friends. Terry, had a new accounting firm and was great at organization and business and all of that stuff. But he didn't have the volunteers. So after sort of 2 years of poking around in the dark, they decided, let's put this together. And that was really the birth of Why Me.
That's fantastic. I've known Terry. So Terry and Carl Goldstein are also my CPA, my accountants as well. And that's how I first got introduced to you folks as well. So yeah, they're definitely a well-connected individual, and that makes sense. I love that they came together, took their strengths and started something. So when it first started out, what did a lot of those services look like? How did you support the children and the families at first?
So Why Me's been around since 1985. I actually got involved as a family. My son, Ben, was diagnosed with leukemia at 19 months. Wow. So I sort of came into the mix in 1993. So Why Me was still a very young organization at the time, which essentially means we were very grassroots with no money. I don't think any of the staff got paid. They got a stipend and a reimbursement for mileage. That was really about it. So it was Margaret and her sister working out of the trunk of her car, and they had a phone in Terry's office, and a lot of volunteers. And at that point, it was really just about, again, get the families together outside the hospital setting. Parents meet other parents, kids meet other kids. We used to go to the old Whalen Park, amusement park, and have a day of just, hot dogs and running around together. But cancer's very isolating, right? So when you have a child diagnosed with cancer, all of your neighbors run over with noodle salad and cards and stuff. And after about a month or 3, everybody starts to drift away. Yep. They don't want to intrude. They don't want to say the wrong thing, or you scare them. And so cancer is very isolating. Your whole life grinds to a halt. Your job, the things that you can go out and do. Plus, there's a lot of stress and fear and anxiety. So everything about your life changes and nothing feels normal. So to meet other families and run around with other parents and ask questions and try and figure out, how do I have a normal life when nothing about my life is normal anymore? There's great comfort in that. And that's always been at the core of what Why Me's mission is. Makes
sense. Now, when you guys first got started, how did you get connected to the children and their families at first?
So Margaret, we were sort of all UMass families, Okay. So Margaret would go up and bring coffee and donuts to the families, and so everybody in the early days had the same story of the day they met Margaret, where she walked in with Dunkin' Donuts and a cup of coffee and said, hey, we can help. Everybody warmly remembers meeting that lovely woman. And Terry was sort of the guy behind the curtain. In the early days, like he did family things at his house and had cookouts and stuff. But Margaret was really the face of Why Me in those days.
Sure. And then now over the years, you guys are doing more and more support to the families. And I think the organization starts to grow into what eventually becomes Why Me and Sherry's House. Tell us a little bit about how Sherry's House came about.
Okay. So I was still a family at that point and not involved on staff. Why Me, as the fundraising got better and, we could increase services, there were sort of more things going on, bigger things going on. The Christmas party had, literally hundreds of people at it that were all Why Me families that spanned, all of the years since the beginning. You got to ask me. About the house.
Yeah.
Okay. So I start to trail off because it's such a big story.
So much going on. Yeah.
So I remember hearing that Terry had bought an old home in Worcester, that there had been this dream for a long time of having our own space. Because remember, up to that point, anything that we wanted to do had to be an offsite. If you wanted to have a cookout, you had to find a ball field somewhere. Yeah. If you wanted to have a support group, then you had to find a conference room and a Marriott somewhere. The idea behind having the house was we could have our own space, so that we could do, these gatherings, sort of in our own comfort zone and in our own space. So, at that point, Wyme's services, just to back up a little bit, were, the fun stuff and the practical stuff. Fun stuff was family fun events and outings and Christmas party and Halloween party and all of that stuff. And the practical stuff was sort of limited financial assistance, gas cards, gift cards, monthly support groups for families in active treatment, bereavement support, and then also, partnering with the local community and business owners and, looking at all the ways that a family's life has been disrupted. And then how can we bring resources in the community to bear on that to solve problems? If somebody's a roofer or somebody's a plumber and you can get them to fix something or fix somebody's car and we don't have to pay for it and you make a problem go away, then that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've made this very difficult time a little easier in this family's life. And so it was a lot of networking with local area businesses. So, cue the house. Terry buys this wreck in Worcester, which needs a lot of renovation.
This is over on Pleasant Street.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there were lots of things with eyes in the basement and in the attic, and it was a wreck. And I heard about it. I thought he was nuts. I think most people who saw the house thought he was nuts. But like most founders, he wasn't looking at any of that.
He had a vision.
Yeah. Of what this was going to be. And so when he walked in the front door and saw the foyer of this old Victorian home, he saw in his mind's eye what it would be, not what it was, which I think is a founder's gift.
I agree.
It's about vision.
Absolutely. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that I remember reading when researching this is a lot of families do come from out of town or out of state to get care, right? Because we have a lot of great facilities locally.
Yeah.
And does the house work as housing temporarily for those families as well when they're getting care?
So that's another component. So, the interesting thing is when Terry designed and built the house, we didn't actually know how it was going to get used. And he had an idea of what he thought would be helpful. And it's turned out to be a little different than that. So, originally it was just supposed to be sort of respite.
Yep.
Your kids are at UMass and they're going to be there for a week or a couple of weeks. Well, hey, you can come to Sherry's house and take a shower. You can have grandma stay there and that kind of stuff. And it's ended up being different than that. So if you look at our families, if you drew a 2-hour circle around Worcester and Boston, that's the commutable distance for the New England hospitals in Worcester and Boston. That's where most of our families come from. So, I'm sort of a good example of that. I live in northeastern Connecticut. We did all of our treatment at UMass. We did bone marrow transplant in Boston. I would never have lived at Sherry's house, but I did all of the support groups. I came to all the family fun events, and it became part of the fabric of our life, all of that support. So the residential families are people who come for the care. They relocate for the care. They come outside the footprint from Montana or North Carolina or Puerto Rico. They tell you they can fix this in Boston or Worcester, and that's where you go. And then you figure out the rest later. So our residential families are ones who have relocated for the care.
Got it. Makes sense. So now let's go forward just a little bit. So you joined the organization in 1993, correct?
Yes, as a family.
As a family,
Uh-huh.
Perfect. And then so what made you convert from being part of the family to taking over as the executive director?
Okay, so good question. So I had the slowest slide, glacial, in history into another career. And I used to look at guys in their 40s and 50s and think, like, how do you end up doing something completely different than the way you started out? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
For me, it was, there was what I studied and did professionally, and then there was my own personal experience. So my background is, accounting undergrad and, master's in finance from Boston College, worked in banking my whole career. I was an analyst. I was a good analyst. It appealed to my nature. I sat in a cube. But I went through this experience with my son, and it changed my life.
Sure.
He had a bone marrow transplant up at Dana-Farber. He did not survive his illness. He passed away at the age of 5 in 1996. And I stayed involved with Why Me all those years. I came to bereavement group, was obviously a very broken person at the time, having lost my only son and a little boy.
I can imagine.
So, Why Me was instrumental in how I put my life back together. So, as I moved along, I always knew that the course of my life at some point would have something to do with this experience with my son, but I had no idea what that would look like. So, in the, early 2000s, my father, who'd been an entrepreneur his whole life, had sort of been blessed with the culmination of his life's work and financial resources to be able to begin sort of embarking on philanthropy.
Okay.
And so my parents and I had sort of made this pact when my son died, like, hey, sometime we're gonna do this. So we had actually thought about building a house for kids with cancer. We were aware of David's house up in New Hampshire and some of these hospitality houses, as they're called. And so we had this grand idea like, hey, we'll build a house. It'll be Ben's house. It'll be great. The idea of that is noble and terrific. The reality of that is very daunting.
Sure.
Because it takes, 20 years to build a presence in a community and volunteers and all of that infrastructure, which, quite frankly, Why Me had done all of the boots on the ground since 1985. So very quickly, it was sort of obvious to us that the best way to achieve what we were looking to do was to partner with Why Me, that had been there for us since diagnosis, and just next level this thing.
I love that.
So we walked in the door, and I sat with Margaret, and I said, Margaret, it's Christmas. What do you want to do? And we talked about, well, you can get naming rights for a room, and I'm shaking my head, and I said, you're not getting it.
I'm all in.
We want to do something big, really big. So what we ended up doing was building a 3,000 square foot addition on the house when they had just finished the house, and they knew nothing about running a residential cancer house. That's not what we did for the first 20 years that we were around. So, it was just, from the ground up, sort of figuring out, what is it that we're trying to do? What is Sherry's House's mission as a part of Why Me? And so that's important. Sherry's House is not a separate thing. It's literally like a program that Why Me runs. It's the house where everything happens, but it's all Why Me. So our mission is still the same. It's about supporting the families, getting them together outside the hospital setting, and supporting them. But now we have our own place to do it.
And I love that. And that place, or that section, the addition, is called Ben's Corner, correct?
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
I love it. And so I read that you oversaw that entire planning and the construction of that entire piece as well.
I did.
And then when it was all built and it was ready, is that when you officially took over as executive director, or when did you step into that role?
So that's an interesting piece of this too. So my family donated the money, and my charge was to oversee the construction, and I knew absolutely nothing about the construction of anything. I can't cut a piece of wood in half and end up with two pieces. So, but in my mind's eye, I could see what we wanted to end up with. I had spent months living in Ronald McDonald House when we were going through transplant in their housing, and so I knew what families were looking for, and I knew what we needed because I'm a family. So, I worked with the architect and with the staff at Why Me. I was just a volunteer at that point, but a full-time volunteer. I had actually gotten laid off from banking and had twins now. So my little guys are at home, and I'm a full-time volunteer overseeing this construction. And so what I did is every sub that came in, I told them our story. I told them what we were trying to do, and just asked a million questions. And I learned a lot of things in that process. People love to talk about what they do. And so when you ask guys questions, they want to teach and they want to educate. And right away, I realized, people want to help. And so if you tell everybody what you're doing and show them your passion for what you're trying to create, what they can do, they will do. And some guys said, listen, it's just me. I can't afford to donate a job, but I'll do the best job I possibly can. And other people were incredibly generous. And then the word of mouth got out. So I can't tell you the number of times doing this project that I was sort of white knuckling, like, I need a structural engineer, I need an electrical engineer, I need, and somebody would walk in the door and go, my girlfriend's brother-in-law said you're doing this project, and in comes the structural engineer,
Yeah, you had the need and it was provided somehow.
Yeah, and I am not an optimist. I mean, I see obstacles when I look at stuff. I don't sort of have that entrepreneur thing where you just sort of see like, oh, I know it'll work out. I was like, I don't know how this is going to work out. But when that kept happening, when people showed up to help and were so generous, it really sort of taught me that, you can will something into existence. And I was so impressed with what Terry was able to achieve with Why Me and then with Sherry's House that I was really just riding the wave. So we built the addition. I went out to basically every hospitality house that did something akin to this within 150 miles and got to know the executive directors and said, hey, want to give me your house manual and your fire plan and anything else you can think of that I don't know enough to ask for? And I did sort of a best practices review, which I have continued through the years for just everything under the sun, from cleaning procedures to fire plans to just how you manage a facility.
I love it. And now, so at some point you take over as executive director.
Mm-hmm.
The organization as a whole continues to grow. Tell us a little bit about what it looks like today. I mean, for our listeners who may not be familiar with us, tell us a little bit about the services and what they look like today, because I'm sure there's been changes over the years.
Okay. And so the last part of what you asked me before was sort of how I got in the mix. Yeah. So full-time volunteer, still not in banking. My kids were, getting a little older, and I thought, I got to do something. I got to go back to work. But, now I'm, in my late 40s. I'm a banker. I've been out of my career for 6 years, which is basically career suicide.
Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting that you probably also started to find something that you're very passionate about and something that was meaningful for you. And I can only imagine going back to work in something outside of that would feel like almost a letdown or a disappointment at that point.
Well, and there's a couple of things that are really weird about it. Like when I was a full-time volunteer, I was sort of struggling with like, well, how do I gauge my success? When you work in corporate, it's all about, what your salary is or what your job title is. When you work in nonprofit and you're getting stuff donated and in-kind donations,
it's hard to quantify.
It's hard to quantify your success. So I started looking at it as, the value of my time is, well, how much money am I saving? How much stuff am I getting donated? How, those kinds of things like, hey, I got a parking lot donated. That's great. I made $22,000 this week. So, it was that kind of stuff. And so as I went along, and Margaret had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and managed to survive for over 3 years. And we had talked about succession and staff and that kind of thing. And, there was an opportunity for me to come in and lead. And having worked with the staff, Terry had asked me when we donated the money to get on the board of directors. So I was already in the mix. I was already involved. So it was a natural fit to come in. In the beginning, I didn't really know what my job was. So I just sort of figured it out by osmosis. I was the operations director. Then he made me executive director. Gosh, I don't even know when that was. I guess that was sort of, 2006, 2007 in there. Been there ever since. In the beginning, it was, okay, I'm going to run the place. I'm going to oversee the construction. But I was a little scared of the families, as weird as that sounds. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be that close to cancer and its devastating impact on a family. That was a little too raw for me.
I can imagine.
One of the things that we built when we did the addition was and I know I digress a little bit, but we did a playground, we did a playroom in the basement, we did a big activity center, and then over the top of that, we did a family comfort suite, which is a nice sort of description of this is for post-transplant kids and terminal kids. If people want to do end of life with us, then this is a space so that you're not doing this in your living room or in a hospital with fluorescent lights. So we had the first family that actually had a child pass in the suite. The wife was asking that I come and support her husband. And so our new Director of Family Services, Danielle, who was she was a kid at the time. She was in her 20s. Her first job was with us. She'd been trained under Margaret. She called me and she said, I know you don't want to do this piece of this. You were very clear about that, but they're asking for you. And so I'm just calling to see what you think. And I thought, she's like 27. I can't throw her into this. I need to show up. And I had no idea if I was going to be able to do this, if I was ready for this. But we just showed up and we figured it out. And we sat Shiva for 3 days and took shifts. And when that child died, I came down to the office and I was calling the funeral parlor. And when I hung up the phone, I burst into tears. And I pulled myself together. And that was the first family, that passed in the suite that I was involved with. And from that moment on, I knew I could do it. But I would never have known if I didn't just jump in and do it.
Yeah.
And so now I'm intimately involved with all of this. But boy, it was a glacial sort of move. They sort of took me kicking and screaming into this. And I'll be honest with you, I used to look at, Margaret and Terry and parents who went through this with their own kids and thinking, it's awesome that they want to support families and that they have a heart for this. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought, boy, if I was done with this, I would run in the other direction. Why would you want to be around this after your own experience was done? And I think the reason is because you learn something about how to go through this with some grace and dignity and keep your sanity. And if you can impart some of that to somebody else and help them do it better and not have regret, then you got a little piece back of what was robbed from you, and it's healing. I mean, I learned that the most healing thing that you can do is be in the service of other people. And so if you can make the pain in your life useful to somebody else, if you can use those experiences to make yourself useful, what a lovely thing, right? That's a legacy.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine that when that family needed to speak with someone and needed somebody to console them and walk them through it, to me, it seems like there's only one person that could do that, and it's somebody who has been through it themselves.
And if I hadn't been through that experience myself, I would have no idea what to say.
Yep.
And you would stumble all over like, well, do I have the right to say that?
Exactly.
Does that even make any sense? Are they going to get mad when I say that? You just think about, what did I want to hear? What did I want somebody to tell me? You want somebody to lean in and say, it's not always going to feel like this. And you are not alone, And when everybody else around you is running away, because they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Why Me leans in and says, you're not alone, and I'll be a witness. I'll be with you, you know? And that's really all people want, you know? They just don't want to be alone.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's how I got into all of this. And so what Why Me looks like today is we've never forgotten where we come from. Half the staff are all parents who went through this experience with their own kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the events have gotten bigger. The services have expanded. You know, all of those things have grown as the funding has grown, but it's still sort of the same core as it was. It's the fun stuff and the practical stuff. Let's look at all the ways that a family's life has been disrupted and what can we do to ease those burdens.
Now, when you first got started, you mentioned that most of the families came to you folks through UMass.
Mm-hmm.
At first,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was just Margaret walking through with, like you said, a Dunkin'
Right.
Donuts coffee. How do you get connected with families nowadays?
Good question. So in the old days, it was just referrals through the hospital. So pediatric oncology social workers at the diagnosing institutions call up and say, hey, we've got a family. We do clinic visits in non-pandemic times up at UMass. And so, you know, Danielle, our Director of Family Services, will go up with other volunteers, meet new families, and we're in close contact with, you know, the UMass social workers and Boston social workers. So we get direct referrals. But one of the things, so in the old days, and you'll relate to this, you know, when the internet was younger, and it was, you know, say 12 years ago, if you had, you know, keywords in your, you know,
On your website.
exactly, then people could find you, you
Sure.
know, so cancer, bereavement, support, you know, those kinds of things. And then when algorithms got more sophisticated, we noticed we didn't come up at all in Google search. If you didn't know what we were called, you would never find us. So we completely redid the website. It started off with, you know, let's redo the logo. And then it was, you know, let's redo the website. And then it was the printed material. And, okay, let's redo everything. So when we redid the website and we created a logo that could be produced on a mobile app and all of those things, and started doing blogs and, you know, all of the right things that you have to do to come up in searches, people can actually find us now on their own. And so some people come to us after their kids have passed away, and they're looking for bereavement support. So people come to us sort of at all stages in their journey. Now, some of the things that make us unique and different from other places is a lot of people look at Sherry's house and they say, oh, you're like the Worcester Ronald McDonald House. They only see the residential piece because that's something that's tangible. It's something that you can understand. So I always tell people, hey, forget about the house. And I talk to them about support services, as we've talked about, because that's really the core of what we do. Residential, super important, but smallest piece of what we do. The numbers break out to, if we have 100, 110 families that we're actively working with over the course of a year, that breaks out to about a third in active treatment, about a third that are off treatment or in maintenance, and a third that are bereavement families. So we're unique in that whole support component. You don't really see that with other places. They either do residential and nothing else, or they help with support while you're in active treatment, but as soon as you're off treatment, like, peace out, you're done. That's not Why Me's story. Why Me is once a family, always a family, because this is not over quickly. You know, pediatric cancers, you know, leukemia, lymphoma, sarcomas, brain tumors, those treatment protocols go on for years. So your whole life has changed. And you're going to be, if you're lucky, going through this for years. And then the after effects of that, and living from scan to scan, or blood test to blood test, or bone marrow aspirate to bone marrow aspirate to make sure that you're still in remission and okay. Risk of relapse. And then, families have been involved in this for 5 years, 10 years. They've come to all the YME events. They've come to support groups. So they've learned something along the way, and they, in turn, become the support for the newly diagnosed and the newly bereaved. So we function like a big support group.
Sure.
And so it's a family of people who stay involved. So, other places see a lot more people for a shorter period of time. We see, we may have 25 new families a year, but they might spend a decade or more with us.
Yeah.
And we get involved in a little bit of everything. So, and it's the entire family, right? So there's, some support for the whole family, for the marriages. You try and make sure that the marriage stays intact in this. And also sibling support, right? They're the forgotten casualties in all of this.
I was just going to say, my senior year of high school, I did a volunteer week or two at a place called Camp Sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
And my role there as a volunteer was actually to spend time with the siblings. And the way it was, we were educated was that the child that was going through the terminal illness at the time, the world had to revolve around them. The parents needed to give 100% of the time and attention to them, and everything was about them. And the siblings often were kind of forgotten about, like you said. And so I know that organization, that's what we did. We spent time with those kids to just let them have fun, be around other siblings that have gone through the same thing.
Right.
And you guys focus on that as well.
Yeah, so that's a huge part of what we do is it's the whole family, because this really does affect everybody. So, for the siblings, they're the ones who, hey, I had plans this weekend and now I got shuffled off to my aunt's house and everybody looks frightened and nobody's talking to me. Mm-hmm. They are afraid for their sibling. They're also angry and resentful, and that's hard to talk about. Like, do you have the right to be mad at your brother who has cancer? But, he's train wrecked this experience has train wrecked, the whole family. It's and it's also impacted everybody financially. I mean, that's the other lion in the room with this is your child is diagnosed. This is going to go on for years. Most of it happens outpatient, right? So 3 times a week, you're going to go back and forth to clinic. That might take half a day or all day. So the reality of that is in a 2-earner household, somebody's quitting their job.
I was just going to say, yeah.
You had mortgage all figured out and car payments and starting to save for college maybe, and now you've lost an income. Mm-hmm. So it's emotionally devastating, financially devastating. And the siblings are watching all of this. They don't want to make things any worse. So the parents are trying to protect the kids. The kids are trying to protect the parents. Kids are better at it. So, one of the things that can be really sad is you go through this whole experience, your child with cancer survives, but maybe the marriage doesn't. Mm-hmm. Or a couple years down the line, the siblings go off the rails. And it happens all the time. So knowing that, that's the support all along the way of, doing a bereavement retreat and plucking people out of their life for a weekend and saying, let's talk about what you've been through, where you're at, and what work you have to do in your life to be a whole person, and supporting those kids. And one of our staff members, Rebecca, who's also our director of fundraising, she's also a YME mom. She's also a bereavement mom, roping those parents in. She's done a beautiful job of creating, the sibling program. And because you've got, survivors in there, you've got sibling survivors in there, you've got, these kids who have grown up with YME and they want to give back. And they also have learned something about this whole experience. Yeah. So, it started off with them doing sort of volunteer opportunities and then doing sort of, fun events. Now, one of the things that's been an interesting change over the years is when I was a new YME family. It was all little kids. Everybody was sort of like 2 to 8, 2 to 10. It was all leukemia and brain tumors, but it was all little kids. Years later, we have a lot of teens. We have a lot of kids who are, sarcoma kids, and they're 16 or 18 years old. What a 16-year-old thinks is fun is very different than what an 8-year-old thinks is fun.
Yeah, sure.
So, there's been this evolution in the programming of, trying to do things that are age specific.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I just kind of wanted to make sure we touch upon too is, like I mentioned in when we first opened today, you guys are not affiliated with any national organization. So as you guys are putting on all of these events, it's 100% funded, and the fundraising is done right here in Worcester by you guys. Right. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So, the backdrop to that is everything we do is free, including residential lodging. We do not charge the families for anything. So it's really expensive to be free.
I can imagine.
And we also do not solicit any state or federal funding. So, that's for a couple of reasons. We don't want the state or the Fed telling us how to support our families or what we're allowed to do. So we are masters of our own destiny, but that's a lot of work. We have to raise our annual operating every year. So we do all of our own fundraising. So, the funds come from, our, fundraisers, local area businesses that may decide to do a third-party fundraiser for us, because that's terrific. That's no staff time. We show up at a check presentation. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then we do some grant writing to, family foundations and corporate foundations. And then it's memorials and donations from there.
Yeah. Now, I know you guys have a few events coming up. I saw a virtual pasta class at Volturno's. Mm-hmm. That's coming up on Friday.
Yes.
And then you have the spin for the kids, which you guys have been doing for a while now.
Yes, a couple of years. So, Andy at Worcester Fitness has just been absolutely awesome and has just next leveled that event in the past, which is just super helpful for us,
That event so that's a fun event. I've actually done that event for 3 years now, and it's this Sunday. I'm doing it again this Sunday. It's a 3-hour spin class. Mm-hmm. And so Andy tricked me into it the first time, though. It was, I think Carl and Terry, sent me an initial email, and then Andy said, yeah, I'll walk you through everything, Rick. And I said, yeah, I'm sure. I'd love to participate. And he said, it's a 3-hour spin class, and I had never done a spin class. I'd never been on a bike
You're
before.
You're a braver man than me.
Well, I said, okay, I'm up for it. I'll do it. And I showed up with myself and a water bottle, and I jumped on the bike and I started pedaling. And somewhere around the end of the first hour, they said, all right, where's your next teammate? And I said, wait, what? We were supposed to bring other people, and the rest of the teams are switching out every hour.
Right.
No, I rode it for 3 hours straight.
Wow.
I didn't know we were supposed to bring a team member. But I think last year they raised $40,000, if I have that correctly.
Right.
This year, I'm sure it's going to be it's a lot different, obviously, with COVID this year. It's mostly a virtual spin class, but there's a small group that's going to get together on Sunday and ride. And I'm going to ride for 3 hours all by myself, but I'm prepared for it this year.
Wow, that's good. Well, and you're young and you've got a lot of energy.
Yeah, exactly. And then you guys have Nailed It or Failed It coming up in April. Tell me a little bit about that one.
So that's one of our board members' wives, Rosemary Hasseltine. Her husband is with Consigli Construction. Yeah. Her husband has helped out with, sort of family support, and also helped out with the house and some of our projects. And so Rosemary, she and her husband did an event last year, and that was super helpful. And so she was just trying to come up with another thing that we could do that would be fun. And so Nailed It, I guess, is a show. I've never seen it.
So my daughter loves this show. It's like a baking show. My kids watch it.
So they bake a cake, and then people have to replicate that cake.
Yeah. And when you're all done, you put your whatever you replicated, you put up there, and the judges tell you whether you nailed it and you got it right, or you completely failed it. And usually you're failing it.
Right. So it's a couple of things. Obviously, it's a fundraiser to raise money, but also because if it's it's something fun and it's out there that people are talking about, it also helps tell the story of Why Me and Sherry's
Absolutely.
House and get the word out there.
Yep.
And so, you raised an interesting point earlier in all of this is when you're not a national charity, when you don't have name recognition that sort of jumps off the page, you're at a disadvantage. People don't know your story. They don't know what you do. And people get approached with a lot of things. Here's another nonprofit. Here's another charity looking for money. So it's, how do you tell your story so that it's something compelling that people can understand, that they want to support? So, for us, we don't have sort of national name recognition, but we get a lot of donors who come along who say, I've done national things and, I want to get involved with something that's more local. I want to get involved with something where my personal donation is going to make a huge difference.
Yeah.
So it matters as a matter of magnitude on scale, and that matters to people. And then another thing that matters to donors a lot is when they look at us and say, wow, you guys are self-funding. You're not taking tax money. And also when they find out, the founder lost his own daughter. Half the staff went through this experience with their own kids. They look at that, and the message of that is these people are not messing around.
Yeah, they're mission-driven.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, that's where Why Me came from. That's where Sherry's House came from, is never underestimate the determination of people working on behalf of their dead children.
Yeah.
They know what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And that's something that people can understand and they can relate to, and they can feel good about, because there's people out there who have money, they have resources, they have a heart for philanthropy, and their struggle is, how do I find the right thing? How do I find a good fit? How do I find something where, my money's not going to be squandered?
Yeah, absolutely. And now, I told you earlier that we've been doing some research on you guys, and we've worked with you guys for a while, both professionally and through nonprofit and joining different events.
Yes, and I do have to say, for all of your support through the years, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And just as a company, like, the whole IT part and all of that, like, it's so important, it's so critical to what we do, but because we're not techie people, I know what to do with families with cancer. I have no idea what to do with networks and computers that aren't functioning. So you guys just, you just allow us to do our jobs and to spend our time doing what we know how to do. So we are so happy to have you, both for your support, but for in-house, the difference that you've made for our IT experience.
It's our pleasure. And like I said, the entire organization here at Cinch, everybody knows about it. Everybody loves it. I don't know if you see it, but we have a break room right down the room. And we even have guys that collect bottles and to donate the money for recycling and cashing them in and stuff like that. But one of the things that we noticed recently, and I told you we got a bit of a surprise, is we noticed on your website there's actually a section where you can reach out to Why Me and Sherry's House and put on your own event and your own fundraising event. And so the team here has been collaborating recently, and we actually have an employee who's on the road right now as we speak, while we're recording this podcast, putting some stuff together. And Cinch IT is filling out that information because we're interested in doing a 100-mile Ruck march to raise money for Why Me Sherry's House in a few months here. We're actually looking at the calendar in sometime May or June of this year and trying to bring people in from the community, because there's a lot of people in this organization that enjoy fitness as well, and so they get to combine raising money for a fantastic organization like yours with a fitness goal. And we spent all weekend actually mapping out a 100-mile Ruck march.
Now, tell me, what is a Ruck march?
All right, so a Ruck march is putting a backpack on, essentially, a rucksack, a military rucksack or any backpack, usually about 35 pounds on your back, and you will actually march or walk for 100 miles. And it'll be probably broken up over about 3 or 4 days. the crew's talking about whether they want to camp out at certain ways. They actually mapped it out. We were at your facility twice this weekend. We started from your facility. We went by the reservoir into Holden. We went up into Spencer, Paxton, up through Barry. So they're going into like the state park and hitting a lot of those trails, and they're talking about doing, camping out and things like that.
Awesome.
And so we actually have some guys picking up some equipment right now, and we actually have 2 people assigned to organizing the entire event right now and putting it all together and seeing if we can bring in some people from the local community. We stopped up at Stone Cow in Barry, the local brewery, which might be a stop along the way to see if they can allow us to camp out and kind of celebrate together at
Perhaps
a certain
hydrate.
milestone. Hydrate, exactly. Something other than water. But bring in some of the other businesses into the community as well, and just make a really fun event that will hopefully not only raise money, but like you mentioned, bring attention to Wyme and Sherry's house. And
that's outstanding. I just love that.
yeah.
I love
So,
that.
And we have at Cinch IT, we have a full-time videographer who's gonna do a whole series about it to hopefully bring a lot of attention to you folks as well, and hopefully bring in some donations from people who maybe have never heard about you guys before. So
I love the sound of that. And, it sort of harkens back to something that I'm not sure you were aware of. So, when Wyme was very, very young, Terry was trying to raise money and raise some awareness. So he actually ran from the New York border to the Hatch Shell in Boston. I think it was like 150 miles.
wow.
And Terry has run marathons all through the years, especially when we were building the house. And I thought he was always a runner. So when we were getting ready for our 30th anniversary, and doing the research, I actually came to understand that when Terry did that run, he'd never run at all. He was not a runner.
Tell me he trained for this at least.
Well, he trained for like 60 days.
Oh, jeez.
And then just decided to run 150 miles. So he ran 20 miles a day until he made it, and then checked into the hospital.
Yeah, I'm sure. Stress fractures in his feet.
Yeah, his staff were betting what mile he was going to die on. And, he pushed Wyme kids in wheelchairs along the way. And, he was in tough shape at the end.
I totally believe that. So he was on the bike with a spin-a-thon last year.
Yes.
He's still going.
Yes, he's still going. And, that's Terry. So, this idea of the rucksack hike sort of harkens back to, those very, beginning days at Wyme when they were selling hot dogs on street corner for $1 and Terry did his big run.
And I don't know if it's why Terry did it, but we talked about it. We actually had a meeting about it this morning as well. And one of the things we talked about is we said, why a ruck march? And one, I'm an ex-military guy, so putting a heavy rucksack on my back and saying walk forever, I can do that. And for a lot of people that are going to volunteer to do this, we know it's going to be painful. 100 miles with 35 plus pounds on your back is going to tear up your feet, and it's going to be painful and stuff like that. But to your point earlier, I have 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm incredibly fortunate that they're healthy. And so I'm not the person to have that bereavement conversation. I couldn't even imagine it. So when we're doing this and these volunteers are going through, when their feet hurt, when their shoulders hurt, when they're in pain, doing it for the right cause, knowing how much pain those families go through is what helps you get through an event like this,
right,
and makes you feel proud to raise money for such a good event. And so we thought it was fitting.
And the rucksack is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor for burden, sure, and for shouldering someone else's burden. It's a lovely idea, and that I love that you're going to do it, in the community, but you're also going to do it in the state parks and that kind of thing, because it's this is what everybody learned in the pandemic is it's about family, and it's about being outside and connecting with nature and rejuvenating your spirit.
Yep.
So on so many levels, I think it's just an awesome idea.
Well,
so
I
thank you. Super excited. That's great.
Yeah. And so we're on your website. We'll be filling it out now that we've officially told you. We'll be filling out that information and whatnot. But also in this podcast episode, on the YouTube videos, on everything that we put out when you told us your founder story today, we'll include links to your website. So if other people also want to put together a fundraising event or just want to participate in one that you already have going on, they'll have the links to all of that information as well.
Excellent, excellent. And we encourage people, please, log on to our website. It's www.wyme.org. We're also on Facebook. There's lots of awesome pictures there. And when you get on Facebook and when you get on the website and you look at the pictures, it really helps you sort of look at the kids' faces, the families' faces, the events that we put on, and really see, like, what does that look like? What does that look like? And is that something that I'd like to get involved with and support? So
absolutely.
We thank you for everything you've done for us through the years and for helping us get the word out. And, we encourage people, please, check us out. And in non-pandemic times when things are back open and we can have tours and that kind of thing, we give tours all the time. Love to have people come in and look and see what we do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was great to hear your founder story.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Founder Story Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And don't forget to check out some of the other great stories.